So today we're going to lay out, cut out, and fit drywall. So won't you come along? I love that song. I hope it was as good for you as it was for me. Hey, this is Mr. Carlini with another edition of Virtual Carpentry through the COVID-19 crisis. So first off, your drywall should be stood up on the side of the job site like we have it here. You never want to cut on a set of horses or, laying flat on a pile. Drywall's easiest cut standing up. Believe me, I've been doing this for 30 years and it's the easiest way. You look at any professional drywaller and this is how they're going to do it. So I want to go over some basic cutting techniques. You're going to find that if you try to use power tools, it's going to make too much dust. It's dangerous. It's not good to breathe this dust. So for the most part, drywall is cut with a plain old utility knife, a tape measure, a utility knife, and a T-square. So let's get started. So I want you to understand something about the properties of drywall. It's a core of gypsum with a layer of paper on each side. Now the paper gives it its strength. If we want to cut drywall, all we have to do is destroy the integrity of the strength of one of these sides and it'll snap. So watch this. I'm using this knife. I'm not even pushing hard. I'm going to prove it just by holding it with these fingertips. I score right through the paper like this, give it a little bend, and it snaps. This is how we cut drywall. It's not a hard, deep score. Then we cut the back paper, and it's off. So let's say that we need a piece of drywall 4 feet wide by, 3 feet. So what we're going to do is we're going to measure down the length of this piece of drywall, 3 feet. We'll put our mark. Just a simple crow's foot. Then we're going to take our drywall T-square, set it flush on the top of the sheet, line up one of the edges of the square with our mark, utility knife time, and I always like to put one foot against the T-square to keep it stable while I have the other hand up top. Then I simply trace right down the side of the sheet. I step behind it and give it a little knee. Snaps that easy. Cut the back paper. We now have 2 pieces. So the T-square works pretty good for cross-cutting across a sheet of drywall. But it doesn't work so well for whenever we want to do a long rip down a sheet. So this is how we do that. We pull out our tape measure and we're going to use it as the guide. So a lot of people would say, well, we need a long rip. Let's take a measurement on that side of the sheet and a measurement on this side of the sheet, strike it with a chalk line, and trace it with our knife. Well, that does work, but it's not the most efficient way. How a professional drywaller is going to do it is that they're going to come over here. We're going to measure down whatever size our rip needs to be. In this case, I'm going to say 12 inches. So at this point here, we need to use our knife and our tape together. So here's a little trick for making this work. I always teach people to do it like this. Take your tape measure, hook it over top of the blade like we have right there. Then you're going to take your thumb on the bottom side and on the top side, and you're going to squeeze this so tight that the knife is holding out all on its own. Notice, I don't have the end of the tape over this part where we could have a lot of movement. It's right over top of the blade. And I turn it a little bit so that it looks like that. I then go over to my mark with my knife put together on my tape measure. I set the knife blade right on my mark, and I slide my fingers down. Take a look at that upper knuckle, how it's tight to the drywall, and I clamp this super tight with my thumb. So this is what we're looking for. And this has to be rigid and tight, and we don't want it sliding up and down, so it's a very firm grip. And I continue to watch this measurement that I have up at the top. I have 12 inches right here. So I'm going to watch this measurement that it stays at 12 the whole way. Everything is tight, my arms are stiff, and as I do this, I'm going to walk across the length of the sheet. And I want to be careful that one hand doesn't get in front of the other like this, because this changes our size. So it's just going to be this. A nice, even cut. After the cut's made, reach around behind, give it a tap, and it should snap right on that mark. So after the drywall's cut, sometimes it's a little rough, like we have here. And we want to try to keep that roughness off as much as possible. Because of the fact that we're probably going to be butting the edge of this sheet into another sheet, to take that roughness off, we use something like this. This is a rasp, okay? In the field, we call it a scrubber, but we just drag it down the edge, and it shaves off all those little humps and bumps and imperfections and trues the edge of the sheet up. Now, cutting drywall with a tape measure and a knife, I have to admit, is really hard when you first start. It takes practice. It may take you a couple hundred sheets of cutting drywall to really start getting good at this. So, what I suggest is if you have some scraps on the job site, just start practicing. Lay out some marks and start cutting. Cut 1-inch pieces. It doesn't matter. This scrap's going in the dumpster anyway. Let's talk about layout. If your layout's done properly, your drywall finisher is really going to love you. That means that he or she doesn't have as much work to do. And as you can see, the layout was done very well on this pipe because the gap around it is very small. These outlets were cut pretty close too. Not a whole lot of work to do on that as far as finishing goes. So we always have obstacles to cut around: boxes, pipes, fans, different things that protrude through the wall. But I want to show you how to actually lay them out and cut them. Now, you always want to cut your drywall so that it breaks right on your studs or your ceiling joists. You can't have the edge of a drywall hanging out in no man's land. So if you're 16 on center and 24 on center, full sheets should work unless you're coming out of a corner. Once you're coming out of a corner, you have to probably make a cut so that it'll break somewhere onto your on centers. After your joints are on the on centers, if you have a big room, full 8-footers or 12-footers should break perfectly the rest of the way down the line. Here's a common problem. We have electric already hooked up. We have a temporary outlet set into there. So the first thing you're going to want to do is go over to the panel, make sure that's shut down, because you will get zapped if you're touching this. Next, we want to pull out the outlet and turn it facing straight out. Now, we first have to decide which direction we running the sheets. Are we running them vertical or are we running them horizontal? Horizontal is the most common way to do it in residential construction. Once we have that figured out, we can proceed. Now we're going to lay out these couple electrical boxes that I have mounted on the wall. A lot of times in residential, we hang the ceilings, then we set the top sheet up tight to the ceiling, and we work our way on down the wall, lifting the sheets up and abutting them into the upper sheets. Other times, in a basement like this, you may be standing your drywall right on the floor. In basements or damp areas, I always like to put a little block underneath the drywall before I screw it off, just to keep it up in the air in the event that we have water or moisture on the floor at some point. That keeps it from soaking up into the drywall. So if we have multiple boxes, outlets, pipes, things like that in one sheet of drywall, something you want to keep in mind, always take those measurements off of the same place. Don't take this measurement off of this sheet of drywall and this set of measurements off of the corner down there. So pull all your measurements off of one place, which would be right here. And in my case, I don't have drywall hung above, so I'm going to be setting this a 1/2 inch off the floor, and I'll throw a 1/2 inch block on the floor and measure up from there. 2 3/8 and 4 3/8. The next set of measurements, 19 5/8, 21 5/8. 19 5/8, 21 5/8. As you can see, it's nice to have a partner when you do this. You'd have your partner over there shouting out the measurements while the other partner is over here laying them out. Now we'll do the ups on these boxes. Bottom of the box, 42 1/2, top 46. So we could use the T-square to plumb these down. I like to just use the old slip finger. We could do the same thing with a pencil that we do with a knife. We hook the pencil into there and give it a squeeze. I touch the pencil right to my mark and do the same thing that we did with the knife. I push my finger up tight, squeeze it, and I watch that number. And I draw my vertical stripes. Same thing here, same thing here. And I'm just lining up with my crow's feet that I drew. And I'll transfer that mark across. And these are my 2 cutouts. Now the drywall jab saw is a handy little tool for this. With this 5/8 board I'm using, it's a little tough. But I usually start it with my hammer. And I'm going to cut out what we call a back cut. What that means is I'm not cutting it at a 90-degree angle. This is my hole. So I'm going to angle my saw away from the hole so that the back side of this cut is a lot bigger. As you can see, I angle cut it back. The back side's bigger. That's what we call back cut. We also want to add in our stud lines or floor joist lines. It's important to do that. Nobody's a mind reader. You can't see what's behind that board after it's up. 24, 48. And I can use my T-square, or I could use the old slip finger with the tape measure. So let's try it. That's a pretty nice fit. Now I have to admit, throughout my addition here, most things I didn't cut out by hand with the jab saw. We have a modern tool that's called a Drywall Router. Several manufacturers make these. But there's a bit that goes in here. It looks like a 1/8 inch drill bit. This one happens to be smooth on the very end. Now what this does is this traces around your outlet boxes or protrusions that you may have coming through the wall. I use this in place of the jab saw a lot of times. Just because I'm old and I don't want to have to wear my body out. But this is a great tool to have. It saves a lot of time. In tomorrow's video, I'm going to go more into depth about this tool and how it can really speed up production and the installation of drywall. Thanks for watching, man.